Hello, I'm Sally Smozinski, one of the owners of Radian Compliance, and I'll make introductions in just a second. I want to thank you to our first in a series of webinars on third-party risk management. Today, we're going to focus on how cybersecurity and privacy risks affect the supply chain. So this webinar is being recorded. So you will be getting a link to this recorded session. Therefore, we will not be presenting the slides to you separately. So you'll just get the recording and you'll get that link once we publish it. So the agenda for today is kind of compact. So we're going to do the introductions of our other speakers, review what third-party risk management is all about, specific to cybersecurity and privacy, talk about the pain points, and how to construct a framework for success. And then we'll wrap it up. And there's also Q&A. So if you see on your panel, you have a question and answer button. You can go ahead and put your questions in there. We'll try to get to everything. And if we don't get to all the questions by the end of the webinar, we will answer them and send you all the information. And then the chat's just for chat. So pretty much the standard housekeeping rules. Also, you will receive one CPE for this webinar. Their certificates will be sent out again after the session. So CPEs can be used for professional certifications as continuing education. Okay, so for those of you who know who Radian Compliance is, welcome back. Those who are new to Radian Compliance, we're an organization that is specific with helping companies be compliant to multiple ISO standards and other regulatory frameworks. We work in various security areas of ISO and others. So again, I'm Sally. I'll be the facilitator and the host today. And the main conversations will be with my business partner, Lisa Dubrock, and our very dear friend, Brandon Kivney. So you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Lisa Dubrock and also an owner of Radian Compliance. And many people say to me that I have two mantras, and one is about risk. It's always about risk. It starts and ends with risk. And the other one is with regards to, it's always about continual improvement, never about perfection. So if you remember me for anything, remember me for those two things.
And
Brandon?
Good afternoon. And my name is Brandon Kivney. I am the founder principal consultant of data ethics, and we work very closely as a partner with Radian in the work that we're about to discuss with you today around third-party risk management. And if I had a mantra, mine would be about data custodialship and how you're protecting that information, especially when you're dealing with people's personal information.
Awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and she's going to begin talking.
So welcome, everybody. And before we get started here, let's talk about some common terms that we'll be referring to throughout the session. And the first one is TPRM, or third-party risk management. This is about your supply chain. Specifically, though, we're going to talk about within your supply chain, cybersecurity and privacy. Therefore, there's a couple of C-suite people that we may refer to, and a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, and a Chief Information Officer, a CIO. We may also refer to a CSO, a Chief Security Officer, who deals with all aspects of security, usually within an organization. And then a Data Protection Officer or Privacy Officer may come up in conversation. Finally, we'll be talking about procurement quite a bit here because it's supply chain, right? So a procurement director could be a procurement VP. However you refer to your procurement person, it could be your chief legal counsel or within the legal area. And your business process owners, we can't forget those. And sometimes we do. So those are some of the common terms we'll be referring to as we get started here, and we move on to cybersecurity, privacy in the supply chain. Global supply chains are only as strong as their weakest link. Oh my God, if I've heard anything since I started my career, it's this statement. And we won't talk about how many years before the turn of the century I started my career, but it's been around for a while, and it definitely is about the weakest link is your supply chain is only that strong. So supply chains are highly interconnected. When I look at a supply chain, particularly a supply chain that has not just services, but product in it, many times you're looking at a SaaS, a platform, and a, oh, I just blanked on the I, but as a service. So here you've got service. It's
Infrastructure,
not just
I think.
infrastructure.
Maybe.
Thank you,
Yep.
Brandon.
You're welcome.
So when I look at that, it's not just about the supply chain. It's not just about the software. It's about the hardware. And then how do you make sure that that's secure? That's also going to become a part of a webinar that we'll do in a few weeks on supply chain and AI in the supply chain. But for right now, that very much is a part of how everything's become interconnected. And a single disruption can trigger financial losses, compliance failures, which lead to potentially financial losses, and reputational damage. Okay. When there is an issue, a disruption, a breaking of a heart, so to speak, there's always reputational damage that comes from that. If we want to move on, Sally. Again, it always starts and ends with risk management. This is about risk management. And what do we do and how do we define a risk methodology that can be used throughout our organization to evaluate our supply chain? And then building a proactive risk management framework. Okay, we've got to build that framework. We may not have it, or we may have a framework that we need to strengthen. There are many organizations that do a fabulous job on third-party risk management. And then there's many organizations out there that do a so-so job. And then there's many organizations that say, I have a contract, and that's as far as they go. So we need to build this process around those concepts. This is accomplished by evaluating your supplier partner practices. For us, in particular, in cybersecurity and privacy. Brandon?
So thank you. So as we think about that, let's zero this in to be focused on you. And let's think about this. If you have a scratch piece of paper or a blank note screen, what type of cybersecurity privacy pain points do you experience around third-party risk management? What comes to your mind? And we're going to show you a poll in a second to see if what comes to your mind fits into any of these categories. Suppliers agree to all security privacy checklist items. So you give them this checklist and they say yes to everything and hand it back to you. And you're a little uncertain of whether or not all of those checklist items are in place. There's more IT security functions are being demanded of your portfolio of suppliers, and that you have suppliers you've been working with for ages, but as more and more things become connected and that there's a transfer of information, there are new IT requirements for suppliers that you didn't even fathom that would have these requirements years ago. Shadow IT is increasing supplier cybersecurity privacy risks. So there's some independent decision making of suppliers in what IT they may be using, which may add more risk to the engagement with them as a third party. Maybe all of these resonate. Or, you know what, right now this makes sense, but I would prefer not to vote. That's okay too. we respect your privacy. And if you would just prefer to say, yeah, I'm here, I'm participating, but I would just prefer not to opine at this point in time, that's okay too. So if we could, through the powers of this webinar, those who have the wizardry, if you could make the poll viewable to the participants now at this time, it would be great.
It has been viewable, and we're going to take a 15-20 second break here for you to get a chance to vote.
I didn't see that. Thank you. What's over here? Ugh.
How are we doing with responses, guys?
We have about half of them so far.
Okay, let's give it another 15-20 seconds. I learned last night that a minute is a long time, so I don't want to give it a minute. Okay, Brandon, if you want to move forward.
Sure. So as we go into this, just as we look through these and we think about, it seems as though the majority of those who responded said that all of the above are, for these specific examples, are things that resonate with everybody who is with us today. And so we're going to go into some key points. I'm just going to, Lisa, before I move on, like when you see the poll results, is there anything that you wanted to just highlight at this point in time, or are we going to address that in the slides as they come?
I think it's interesting that nobody talked about suppliers agree to all security privacy checklist items.
Well, I think
that is very interesting to me.
Well, but we did have the checking of all the above, yeah. So
okay,
that could have been skewed there.
Yes, got it. Okay.
All right, so I apologize for what's about to happen, but if those of you like myself who have a song that will run through your brain when someone makes reference to it that you didn't expect, we were talking about these slides and this song came to my mind and we decided to put it in and to share the experience. So pain points, you don't have time for the pain. So that song, I haven't got time for the pain. Okay, so now we're not going to be in violation of any type of copyright issues, but you don't have time for it. And so we're going to examine key components to construct and enhance a third-party risk management program around cybersecurity and privacy. So we're going to talk about four key fundamental areas: governance, evaluate and advise, organize and align, apply and refine.
Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about here is the concept of governance. And we're going to use that very much so for there is no documentation or communication in place to review TPRM, cybersecurity, and privacy risks. Well, that's a big deal, right? And so how do we construct your framework around a governance process? And when we do that, we're going to talk about, now what I've decided to do is Radian's got a lot of clients and we see a lot of things. So rather than pick on a sector or a client or anything else, we're going to say that for all of these examples, it's client A. And client A could be a manufacturer, it could be in healthcare, it could be in advertising, it could be anything. But this is what we're seeing. And particularly, we've got many clients who they have silos. And by silos, I mean they've got an IT department who doesn't talk to anybody. They've got a procurement department who only talks to anybody when the contract is being signed. They've got business process owners that might not talk to anybody either. So we've got silos. And when you're looking at those silos, you need to break them down So a governance framework here is chiefly going to help you break down silos and improve that internal communication. Until you have the internal communication in place amongst the groups, because imagine if you had an IT department that looked at suppliers, and then you had a procurement department that looked at suppliers. Well, they're going to look at suppliers from something very different than that IT department, may have two separate results about that supplier, and oh, the business owner doesn't even know that that's been reviewed. Can't have that happen. Got to have a governance model in place that includes and breaks down those silos. Brandon?
So in that element of breaking down silos, it becomes really important in the privacy element to think about data minimization. And data minimization is about only collecting and transferring the information you absolutely need to do the task that's been defined. And in that data minimization process, there has to be communication. So if, let's say that the IT is facilitating the discussion with the supplier, and purchasing or human resources or whomever the service being offered is making the connection to need certain pieces of information. Well, then that information needs to be reviewed, needs to be discussed as far as what's being provided. But for a different supplier who isn't providing that same service, they're not going to need that same information. So having a universal data sharing process is really not the best situation, and it only comes through governance, where you're deciding and just minimizing exactly what's needed for each of the data transfer needs that are happening. So when we think about these elements, when we're talking about data processing, for example, and I'll get a little bit more into this, the next element, when you have that governance piece, you have people who are talking, and they need to have something common to talk about. So there needs to be an evaluation process that's in place. Are you talking the same language in what you're looking for? And is that coming to the surface? And then through that governance process, and then this next step of evaluating, once you have the evaluation, there should be action items. And those action items should lead to advisability to how are we going to go about changing something to make things better. And that will further then reduce the risk. So when we think about this, as you can see, Lisa and I are kind of doing a round, I don't know if round robin is the right word, but anyway, I'm going to go first this time. And so in thinking about in privacy, for client A, there was a use of geolocation data. And this client was relying on a supplier, a processor, who collected this geolocation data from one of their own processors, suppliers. So there's two removed in this chain. And it comes to find out that the processor was providing client A with data items X, Y, and Z. No problem, everything is moving along. And so that's where the risk discussions were around data items X, Y, and Z. Well, after further review, it was understood that that supplier also had access to items A through W, but they weren't using it. X, Y, and Z, and that's what it is that they gave to client A. But the fact that they had access to it, there was a risk that they had, which then client A inherited because of the relationship that was going on there. They should have evaluated and advised ways to further section themselves off from that decision-making process. So that's a more specific example around privacy management and evaluate and advise. Lisa?
So when I look at evaluate and advise, oh my goodness, the biggest thing that comes to my mind is this concept of a SOC 2. I don't know how many times within our client base, our clients have told us, oh, well, it's okay, they have a SOC 2. Okay. So my next question is, have you read it? Do you have it? And have you read it? And most of the time, I get a very sheepish response of, Well, no, but it's a SOC 2, so everything's okay. Well, in that SOC 2 is both positives and negatives. So if you look at it, it will tell you where there's control weaknesses. Now, do those control weaknesses affect you as an organization? This is very much where a shared responsibility matrix comes into play in this evaluation and understanding who has responsibility for what, the supplier versus the organization, and use of that shared responsibility matrix. And then from a regulatory perspective or a legal perspective or whatever, you've got that, great, you've got that SOC 2. The other thing I get is, oh, I've got the SOC 2. Great. Can we open it up? And it's 4 years old. Well, there's a new SOC 2 report that's issued every year. Have you gotten that report? Well, no, I got it when we signed the contract. So a SOC 2 can be very valuable, but it needs to be used in the right way. And then you need to understand from that SOC 2 report what within the shared responsibility matrix remains your responsibility as the organization versus the supplier's responsibility.
So just jump. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to just jump in when you were talking about 4 years. It just makes me think, especially for people on the call today that are in the cybersecurity management end of things, cybersecurity management. Think about what you worried about 4 years ago, if you can even remember that, because there's so many things to worry about that you forget what you worried about 4 years ago, and how different that lens would have been. Wow, that's a really good example, Lisa.
Okay, and as we move on, the next one is in organizational, in organizing and aligning. Okay. The problem, cybersecurity, privacy, risk management approach that each supplier uses differs and causes miscommunication and assumptions. And we need to build an organizing process that aligns these supplier procedures because they are going to be different. There's no way I can make Hershey be the same as Ghirardelli. Okay, never going to be the same, can't make them the same. Okay, so we need to organize and align our practices and also understand who we're dealing with. Shadow IT. I hear all the time from our clients, shadow IT. What do I do about shadow IT? Well, first of all, you've got to build this process. You've got to build your TPRM and roll it out to your organization, and then you've got to have consequences. Because if you don't have consequences, you are complicit in allowing shadow IT in your organization. And by that, I mean, we have a client who has a very robust process. Now, for TPRM, it took them 2 years to implement it. And to give you an idea of size, there are about 1,500 people. Okay, so they're not like tiny, but they're not huge either. And they're in multiple areas. And it got to the point where every single office felt that they could just buy whatever IT they wanted to, whatever software they wanted to. And they couldn't get their arms around every single time something was purchased. It obviously introduced risks to their organization. So by putting a robust TPRM process in place, and then after it's in place and it's operating, they said, okay, we will no longer as an organization pay for any software that hasn't gone through our TPRM process. And that's any. So, if it's going to sit on our network, it needs to be reviewed. And but that took 2 years to get that process in place for what is probably a mid-size organization. And so this doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that happens immediately. It's how do you build it? Brandon?
So that key component of review is huge. In order to organize, you need to have things to organize. You need to know what it is that needs to be organized and how to align it. And if you don't review, you're not going to have the information that's critical for that. And so an example in privacy is similar to the shadow IT element, is that sometimes someone could be perceived as going rogue if they do shadow IT. Like, I can't believe that they're using that. They didn't get permission. Well, maybe there weren't clear procedures. Maybe it was a situation where it was way too stringent and there wasn't an appeal or an exceptions process. So people just decided to go rogue. Well, similarly in data processing, oftentimes there's a scope. We're collecting this data, we're processing it in a certain manner, and we're getting this yield. And then someone says, actually, could you just tweak it a little bit? I'd like to add this and get rid of that. Well, whatever this and that are, and this is kind of like a Seinfeld episode, but the this and that could be incredibly altering to the consent that the data subject provided, if we're talking about personal data especially, and the terms that you described as far as how the data is being processed. And so every situation where data is being shared and processed, there are data processing agreements. Those agreements outline how the processing is to be conducted. And that needs to be organized and aligned now to this new scope, and to make sure that those documents that support that, like terms of service and a privacy policy statements, anything that outlines how the data is going to be used, needs to align now to that new scope, and to make sure that that consent then aligns. So all that needs to be thought of, and one little change can be quite time consuming to ensure that everything, all the T's are crossed and I's dotted. So this element of application and refinement helps to solve the problem of inconsistency between supplier responses to a questionnaire and reality. So we're linking directly back to that first one about the supplier questionnaire and the capabilities that a supplier is stating to an organization that they can do. And oftentimes the difficulty is they may be aware of certain things, they may not know the true application of it, or how to refine it to the business case that they have in their relationship with the organization, and ensuring that compliance, because it could be the first time that they're going through that. Nothing of that's a fault of their own. It's a learning process, and the discussion, again, going back to Lisa's emphasis at the very beginning about communication, feeling comfortable to talk about vulnerabilities, to talk about where you're at, sometimes can be difficult, and it's a risk in and of itself, depending upon who your audience is and what type of trust you've built. But in the application and refinement element, it adds this critical component in the process that, you go ahead and let's deploy. There may be some tweaks that need to happen, but don't get analysis paralysis and not do the application because you don't know how to do it and pretend like it's being done. So a specific example around this is in privacy, user access. User access oftentimes is outlined in an acceptable use policy that an organization has, and the supplier is expected to have an acceptable use policy for them. And it may be a situation, that it's, a lightning strike chance that they're both exactly the same and it's exactly what's needed. More than likely, the suppliers needs to be tweaked and added components to their acceptable use needs to be put into play. So that is a refining element that would be happening, but then there's the training behind it, right? Because if you've changed the requirements, people are going to need to know how to apply it. And so that's an example in the privacy around data access that apply and refine would be utilized.
And I'm going to jump in here with the concept, and I'm going to have two concepts here. One is this thought of, do you ever feel that somebody just responded to the questionnaire that you sent out and just said yes, 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 yes? As a small business, I know how often we get questionnaires from new clients to fill out, and it's always a thought of, should we just say yes, 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 and send it back? And, we don't, because we then realized we hired an attorney who he actually responds and calls the company. And it's amazing what you can negotiate when you need to negotiate. And we've taken the concept that we would rather say, no, we don't do that. We don't do that specific access control, but we do this instead and then sign the contract, knowing that the organization is aware of that. However, that doesn't happen very often. When we talk to our clients, they say, you're the only one who's ever not just turned the questionnaire back in. Okay, well, that tells me something, because I don't think I'm the only one. And Sally with me, we're the only ones who don't just say yes, yes, yes. Okay. The other thing I want to bring up here is application and refinement. And Brandon, he didn't know it, but he pulled this piece of stock art, and it's of a guitar. And many years ago, I was with my family in Memphis on a family trip to Memphis. And when we were there, we went to the Gibson Guitar Factory. And what I found from that is that with Gibson, you pay for quality. So as one of your suppliers, are you buying quality, or are you buying just, yeah, I can do that, maybe. So when you go through the Gibson factory, it's all hand done, but it's all hand done on a set of measurements that are phenomenal, using wood that's of the highest quality. And the only thing that's not hand done is to make the original form. Every single piece of glue, every I'm going to call them rivets because I don't know what they are, but everything else is all done by hand and attached by hand. So it has to be the same. It has to follow a process. And so this is two things within your organization. How do you follow the supplier management process? And then externally to that, do you make it so that you allow a supplier to say, no, but I do this? And then evaluate it against your risk model and evaluate it against your shared responsibility matrix as to whether you can accept that risk or not. Again, remember I said it starts and ends with risk. It starts and ends with risk. So we're going to take a brief pause here before we go into this recap and ask if there's any questions. We're out there. Sally, is there any questions we should be answering right now?
Yes, there are. I've gotten a couple on the side, if you will. So one of the first ones is, so when there's governance, because you said governance is really important. And so let's say that we have the procurement, we have the IT who's looking at the security component, and then we have the business owner, the person that has the relationship with that supplier, right? If they're part of a governance structure, who leads that governance? Is there, because all three of those areas are very important, but is there a governance, a top of the governance? Like who leads that? Would that be the CIO, the CISO?
Yeah, it can really be according to the culture of your company. Okay, you might have a chief risk officer also. So it could be led by that risk officer to put governance around your third-party risk management. Or it could be, many times we see it starting with procurement, but quite frankly, procurement doesn't want to understand the cybersecurity and privacy details. They want to know about financially, whether you're financially secure. Another form of risk in your supply chain risk management piece. We're not talking about it here today, but that doesn't mean it goes away. It's still part of it. And I don't want to necessarily send it out to the business owner.
Right.
And the reason I don't want to do that is that there's a lot of business owners in an organization. And I can tell you just from having one business partner that Sally and I can approach the same solution in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to find somebody. It can be a chief risk officer. It can be a CISO. It could be a chief security officer. It could be however you culturally set up your organization.
Okay, so in line with that, so getting a response on a security questionnaire does not make the supplier compliant, right?
Right.
And so you got these, this governance, and they get it back. So you mentioned, identifying financial risk as part of an evaluation on a supplier to make sure to determine if they have a higher risk. So financial doesn't necessarily make them compliant in cybersecurity or privacy.
No, not at all.
What other rankings might we need to look at to determine that this is a high risk supplier versus a low risk supplier?
I would say one of the highest would be what issues have they had in the past?
Right.
Are you CloudStrike? Well, if you're CloudStrike, it may actually be better to be with CloudStrike today since they've done a lot to shore up, hopefully, their organization. But you could also be a smaller organization. So look at what incidents have been reported on them.
Okay.
There's a plethora of companies out there that take incidents and report on them, organizations.
Okay. And I think I would add too, it depends on what type of data they have access to, right,
Yeah.
of yours, for both a privacy, if they're a data processor or data controller. Okay, good. So we have some others that you stuck in here that you had gotten previous. So if they're a large organization, we've kind of talked about mid-size. If they're a large organization, a start with what do you have control over? So do we have to start with did you answer those questions too?
No, because that's really kind of in this recap here when we're talking about beginning at any stage.
Right.
When you look at this here, this wheel right here, I don't care what stage you start at, start.
Right.
Okay. Understand it's about continuous improvement. It's about getting better. That company that waited 2 years before they said no more shadow IT, they waited 2 years of refining their model to get to no more shadow IT.
Okay.
Communications internally and externally. If you don't have communications between that procurement officer, that business owner, and that security officer, then what good is it?
Right. Right. So we do have an audience question. So how does a third-party risk management program effectively address the issues of the supplier's questionnaires being different from reality? Okay, I think we kind of touched on it, but how much insight can a company have into its supplier's actual operations?
That starts with some changes to your contract, particularly if your suppliers are going to sign your paper, okay, versus you're signing their paper. It also opens up with this concept of if you're you would be surprised how many organizations have SOC 2 reports. You would be surprised how many organizations, particularly the larger ones, have portals where you can pull down all kinds of things. If you're not doing that, then you're not holding up your end of the bargain to see what's going on.
Right.
The smaller suppliers, we welcome if somebody wants to really talk to us about what we have in place, we will be happy to sit down and show you exactly what we have in place.
Yeah. So again, you can't take anything at face value. So you determine your risk level
Yes.
to determine if you question some of those
Mhm.
responses. Okay.
I think just
So
that,
we
just
got
one thing to add with that too is that are you being upfront with what your expectations are for monitoring them? You know, so I think this element of there may be an assumption that, oh, well, you're a supplier of ours, and so you should be reporting to us regularly of X, Y, and Z. But we only told you A, B, and C. So being clear about ensuring that everyone's on the same page as far as how that communication is going to go. Again, going back to Lisa's point earlier about the importance of communication.
Right. Okay. So let's continue, and then we'll finish up the questions that are coming in at the end.
Okay. So, recap, utilizing, the model here. Recapping it is process driven, it's scalable. Don't try to, boil the ocean all at once. Where do you sit in your organization's chain? Are you a business owner? Then start talking to IT or procurement and just talk about your suppliers that you have. Don't worry about the whole rest of the company, and then build it from there. Understand who's in charge. That was a great question. Who's in charge? Is it a chief risk officer? Is it a procurement officer? But no matter what, whether it's IT or procurement, you're going to have to stress to them that it's bigger than a bread box. It's not just about cybersecurity and privacy controls. It's not just about financial controls. How do we pull it together? And be that person who brings it together. Okay. It's always scalable. It's process driven. And it starts with an easy way to do it. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brandon to talk about EASI, which is admittedly, we're 42 minutes into this, our 4-minute sales pitch. Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes.
So yeah, this isn't meant to sound sales pitchy. It's meant to sound as a viable resource, because especially when we're talking about starting at any stage, beginning at any stage, as was mentioned on the previous slide, you may have this type of engagement with third-party risk management that you have in place. You may not have something in place. You have something, and so we're ready to engage with you in helping you build something further. We can assess and recommend certain things if you've gotten started. If it's a situation where there is a third-party risk management process in place and you need some help structuring it or synchronizing it, we're here to do that. Before I get to the I, let me just emphasize something here, is that there are so many software as a service solutions out there to help our everyday lives. Third-party risk management is not immune to that. Those platforms are out there. There are software solutions out there. This is not a software solution. This is a people empowerment solution. This is getting people to answer the question before about, who needs to be at the table? What does that governance look like? To Lisa's point, how do you're going to align it to the culture of your organization. And sometimes it's helpful to have some coaches there to coach and get that team together. So that's an example of the structuring. Once we understand in our engagement process of how your organization operates, that's where the structuring piece comes in. But the key element, you start something, and it's like those, since the sales pitch idea was mentioned here, think about infomercials from the 80s and 90s, and the common phrase for one of them was like, set it and forget it. It's like, okay, we're going to do all this, and then hopefully it works. That's not reality, especially when we're thinking about information management. And so implementation, innovation, improvement. That's why our EASI is spelled a little different than the regular word, because of these 3 I's. Helping to implement, continuously innovate, because going back to the example about the SOC 2 report 4 years ago, very different world than we are now. The year 4 years from now is going to be very different than where we're at. How do we continuously innovate and improve? But there are also some other resources that we wanted to highlight.
So when I look at these other resources, these are totally things you can look up right now today and be a part of. ISO 27036, 1, 2, and 3, and actually 4. So what is this? Believe it or not, it's guidance on managing information security risks in supplier relationships. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 being cloud services, 1 being an introduction, 2 being requirements, and 3 being some very specific hardware and software pieces. So those guidance documents, they're not standards as in you shall, but they're guidance documents, will help you understand third-party risk management. If you don't want to go that far, well, when we look at 9001 or 27001 or 14001, etc., they all have supplier management requirements in them. So how are you dealing with those in your existing frameworks? And then other frameworks, NIST. That's RMF, the risk management framework. NIST's CSF, which is the cybersecurity framework. NIST is very good at frameworks. And PF, the privacy framework. And why are these all so important? And Brandon, if you want to talk to regulation.
Sure. So there's two things that come to mind. These are so important because they raise the standard of operation to cover most regulatory requirements. I'll give you specific examples. Both of them happen to be European because Europe is leading the world in regulation around cybersecurity and privacy. So one is GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the human right to privacy in the European Union and the requirements around that. When you look at a comparable law like the California Consumer Privacy Act, that is something that has been amended already significantly to include additional protections because there were pieces that were not, that's a whole other story, that were not enacted initially. So they needed to do a big change in that law to add additional pieces. And so the question becomes, how do I handle this? And I handle the regulations here. Look at these types of standards. And when you see something like an ISO or a NIST, provides you this element of, if you raise to where these frameworks and standards are, you're going to be set in meeting the regulatory compliance elements in these other places. The AI Act in the European AI Act is another example. It's a first and foremost there, but it's going to be happening in other places. And in fact, I think Sally's going to be talking about a standard that might be helpful in the AI space within a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brandon. And I just lost my thought. Anyway, I'll find it. And so we are working on creating this new series of webinars. Lisa and I speak at many conferences and for other organizations, but we're trying to do it for ourselves. So next week, I'm doing an intro to ISO 42001, which is the AI management system standard. It's one of the newest frameworks for artificial intelligence. So that's next Tuesday. You can sign up. And then our next webinar in line with this third-party risk management, and we get questions about this all the time, is how do you manage AI in the supply chain? Wherever you are in the supply chain. And that's going to be very complex. Hopefully we'll be able to break that down into a little more digestible chunks. Radian is very active with the Apex, which is the former PTAC in Northern Virginia. We have ongoing series for, quality management for government contractors or CMMC need to know. So we do a lot of webinars there. So we also post those on our website, but we've got schedules coming out soon. Lisa, who is a global board member at ASIS, will be at GSX, so can't miss her. She'll be scooting around. You got to get that flag.
No, I don't want the flag.
So make sure you stop, because physical security, logical security, the supply chain is needed for both. And we are trying to ramp up a lot more other events. So keep open on that one. And then I think we have some more questions. And I just wanted to add, Brandon, that, there are tools out there. Do you need a tool? Probably if you have large volumes of suppliers. Procurement, having a supply management tool, because you've got contracts, you have renewals, you have all sorts of things that you need to manage, that tools make that very easy. But to Brandon's point, our EASI program is about the people and the process, right? The logical keeping it all together and making sure that the left hand's talking to the right hand. So I just wanted to kind of preface that. It's really important that tools are great, and AI usage of the tools within supplier management risk is kind of interesting. And then that leads us to another question here. So Lisa, if an organization already has a risk methodology, what additional risk criteria or context do they need to add to ensure that they're evaluating supply chain cybersecurity and privacy risks?
Okay, well, everything from the loss of a supplier. I don't know what your supplier, your risk management process looks like, but do you have loss of a supplier? Loss of a supplier. Every organization is changing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, because we spent a lot of time in the Beltway, the amount of companies that we've come in contact with that are no longer in the last 6 months. Okay, so loss of supplier. Then you have to look at what is the complexity of what sort of PII or private information or confidential information. It doesn't even have to be PII information. I always get upset about this. Do you have, as a supplier, my corporate data? Not my PII data, but my corporate data. Do you have my financials? And I'm not a public firm. Well, then how are you protecting my financials? So those sorts of things become a risk to the organization. So obviously, data breach. Most of the data breaches that occur statistically occur through the supply chain.
Yes, and that's what's led us to this program and these conversations, right?
Yes.
And so kind of staying on the line of risk, how do can you help understand how you risk a supplier as critical? Again, is it the same of what you just said, that if you have this exposure, if they have critical information of yours or your customers, then they're considered high and maybe need some additional evaluation or more recurring evaluation?
Yes, that's exactly.
By all the partners in the governance cycle who touch that
Right.
supplier in one shape or form.
Yes.
Okay. And so how often do you recommend organizations to review those suppliers? Is it once a year? Is it recurring based on whatever, financial?
Well, again, and it's going to deal with you as an organization. So Radian's a small organization, but we look at our suppliers every single year. Okay. You may be a medium-sized organization or a large organization, and you put a risk process in place just to evaluate the risk of that supplier. Is that risk high? Well, then you may look at it every year. But if it's medium or low, medium, you may say, I'm going to look at it every 2 years, or low, I'm going to look at this supplier every 3 years. That may be pushing it, but if they don't have anything confidential from your organization, then from a cybersecurity perspective, are you going to waste time? I shouldn't have said that, but are you going to look at them every year?
And so should all elements in the supply chain review in an organization do that review, or should you have 1 year it's focused on contract terms, another it's focused on updating the security controls, right? Because as security evolves, the security questionnaires become useless, right? Because it's 27,001, 2013, and they just do the Annex A and that's the questions, but now
Yes.
those have changed and technology has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I would just throw in there that most data processing agreements or just contracts in general that talk about incident response usually have some clause in it that says if anything in the understanding of these agreements changes, if you're changing one of your suppliers, that's going to impact us, type of thing, then we need to know. And so I think one piece that's really important is that you have a communication process about change management here. To that example you're talking about, Sally. So when you're talking about, like, yeah, if nothing changes and everything's the same, then there's this routine. But there needs to be, so to speak, a petition to the organization that, hey, we're going to change something and we need, per our agreement, need you to be aware and or need your approval in order to do so. And so that would be a different type of change. So especially when you're looking at resource allocation, when you think about the amount of time, to Lisa's point about the time piece, the amount of time people would be taking in just regular governance to review something, you may not want to have the exact same people who are handling a change management process. It may be, depending upon how many people you have in an organization. So all those things needs to be considered, and that's all part of your governance decisions, that you're finding those allocations of resources and not.
I think we need to close this up.
Right.
We've got 3 minutes left, so if we can move on to the next slide. And if there's other questions, here are mine and Brandon's information. We want to first thank you for attending today. Please do not feel you can't reach out. Please reach out and we'll get back to you. Sometimes it's not exactly the day that you reached out, but we will get back to you. And then, Sally, if you want to talk.
Yeah, we'll be issuing you your CPE credit, so you'll get an email from us and a nice certificate that you can store in your certificate folder. And also, if you, a lot of folks on here are known to us, and we really appreciate your feedback. So for those who just are meeting us as well, we're not sending out a survey, but we would really love to be able to get your feedback. Are there other types of webinars that you'd like us to present? Are there things that we could do better? So if you wanted to share that in the chat or share that in a response, we would really appreciate that. So thank you all for, go ahead.
And if you're coming to us through ASIS, we are looking into whether we can just send the list to Iris to input your CPEs, but you'll also get a certificate.
Right. See that the benefit of having a board member on the call. All right, Brandon, fabulous as always. Lisa,
thank you.
Pleasure to hear what your brain has. And thank you everybody for coming. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.